Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning or good afternoon, those who have joined us already. We're just getting things set up here. We're going to wait a few more minutes before we get things kicked off, give everyone a chance to log in at the top of the hour here. I see that by my clock we're right at the top of the hour, so I think we might give one more minute or so and just give folks another chance to log in before we get kicked off, but hold on with us and we'll get started shortly. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or maybe even good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. It's just about 2 minutes past the hour, and we do have lots of great stuff we want to cover today, so I'm going to get us kicked off. Thanks to everyone for joining us today for our session on screening as a strategy. Today we're hoping to share some thoughts and strategies with you to help you get more from your data and really the intelligence that it can offer. My name's Trent Beatty. I lead the partner program here at iWave. My key focus is really building relationships with other organizations so that we can collectively help our clients get more out of our individual solutions and services and bring together an even bigger impact to your strategies. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Alex from BWF. Alex joins us as a managing associate of BWF Insight, where he oversees all analytics engagements, workshops, trainings, implementations. Alex's expertise spans predictive modeling, business impact analysis, survey design and methodology, and even analytics training and implementations. So we've got some great experience. Alex has worked with companies including BWF, obviously, as well as IBM and Gallup. He's also worked with clients such as Baylor University, Children's Hospital Boston, Children's National Medical Center, UNC Charlotte, and many, many others. So we're really glad to have him. Alex's experience has made him a recognized speaker and a trainer for organizations like CASE, AHP, APRA. I'm sure a lot of those acronyms resonate with the folks on the call today. So again, we're super pleased to have him with us and lead our session today. So with that introduction, I'm going to hand it over to Alex and let him take us into the presentation.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, Trent, for that warm introduction and that very flattering bio. Every time someone reads that, I keep thinking to myself, I need to shorten it up a little bit. But it's great to be able to, speak with you guys today. I'm out here at a conference in Seattle, and I do a lot of networking when I go to conferences and meet a lot of people. And when I meet someone for the first time, I open with a different question. I usually don't open with, where you're from, where do you work, what do you do. I like to open with a question that for me gets a lot more data, right? Big surprise. And that question is, I like to ask you what they're passionate about. So I say, hey, I'm Alex. What are you passionate about? And so I can't, meet all of you today individually, but I can introduce myself. And so my name is Alex Ostley, Managing Associate, Ben Swaley-Fussner, and I'm passionate about using data to transform our world, and specifically in the world of fundraising and philanthropy. So that's kind of my overarching ethos, I guess, or mission statement, if you will. So it's great to meet all of you today, and I'm excited to talk about this topic. And so just a little agenda, how we're going to spend the next hour together. And what I'd like to do is, we already got to the welcome introductions. I want to talk about, where I think the science of fundraising is headed. So there is a developing science and methodology around the work that we do, and that's very exciting to all be a part of that right now. It's a very exciting time to be in this space. So I'm going to give you some perspectives and thoughts on where I think this is moving for us, and then Trent's going to give us a little bit of a primer on wealth screening, kind of in a more specific way. He knows a lot more of the details around that. I'm very excited to be presenting with iWave, which is a service and data that I use every single day in my work. So they're a great partner of ours, and very excited to present with them today. And then I'm going to talk about some applications of wealth screening that may not be what you currently do today or what you currently understand as an application. So we're going to talk about some constituent-focused applications. We're going to talk about some staff-focused applications, and we're going to talk about some organizational-focused applications. So we'll do some micro stuff, looking out, looking in, and then we'll step back and talk about how wealth screening can be applied in another way to help us organizationally. So at the end, my goal is with, the current iWave data you have, or maybe even inspire you to procure some more data, that you have some actionable takeaways, or at least strategic ideas to really start, thinking about implementing within your own organization and your own shop. And the stuff I'm going to be talking about today, by the way, is really relevant regardless of what your industry and mission is. So if you're healthcare, arts, higher education, community, nonprofits, environment, whatever your mission is, these ideas and this methodology that I'm going to be talking about, I think universally applies regardless of your mission. And it also has applications really regardless of your size. So if you're raising $5 million a year, which I have clients that do that, or I've had clients, and I have a client that raises over $1 billion a year, and we talk about these same approaches and these same things. So they work regardless of mission, they work regardless of scale. So we already went through the welcome and introductions. So where are we headed, right? And so this is a headline from one of my favorite periodicals, The Economist, and it said, the world's most valuable resource is no longer oil, but it's data. And so they were talking about something in a more, this is an article more on data and IT security, but I think this applies to us as well, definitely in the philanthropic space. So we have a lot of information, and we're gathering more of it. It's at our fingertips, so we can learn and understand a lot more about our constituencies, right? Whether it's alums or patients or season ticket holders or whoever our groups are, we have a lot of information. And so really, I think as we move forward, we're not in an information struggle, we're in a how do we apply it struggle, which is kind of a little bit of the angle of the presentation today. So the information is there, so how do we make the most of it? You know, and I will say at the top, I had a conversation last night actually with a client who was here at this conference, and they were sharing with me that they have concerns around data quality, you know, and how clean is my data, et cetera. And I shared with them that, you know, so I'm working obviously at Benz Wiley Fussner today. I worked here for 7 years, and I left for a couple of years. I went to the for-profit sector. I worked for Gallup, did a lot of survey design analytics there, and then I left, and I was a North American analytics SME subject matter expert for IBM. So I was traveling all around North America and Europe and working with clients like Wells Fargo and Hilton, and I worked with the U.S. Department of Defense and all these places, and I can unequivocally tell you that their data is a mess too. So the reality is, just as best you can, no one's ever like, oh, I'm super proud of how clean my data is, but don't be concerned and don't be embarrassed or don't be frightened about kind of the quote-unquote cleanliness of your data, because Wells Fargo spends $80 million a year and they have teams of people to clean stuff up, and their situation's a nightmare too. So just as a quick kind of editorial aside around data cleanliness, their data's a mess. Everyone's data is in some state of you know, needing improvement. So data quality to me is kind of like it's an unattainable goal, but it's something we can always strive for. So, and everyone has enough data today, especially as iWave clients. You have enough data today to make value out of what you have. But you know, the one thing that you know, that I think the industry is reframing around is we're starting to step back and we're starting to tie in data and information into a broader context. And so usually when I work with clients, I'm going to try to get my little spotlight here. Usually when I work with clients, they have conversations that start around data, right? I have some screening data, I did an append, I did an overlay, or they're talking about technology and technique, right? So they want to build a predictive model. They have some new software tool that does X, Y, Z. And these are all interesting questions, right? Or these are all topics that I like discussing. But I think the industry is maturing, and the science of fundraising is maturing, is that people are spending more time starting with the proper, what I call the proper focus around conversations, which is starting with our goals. So what is our goal? And then from there, we get better insight into what data and what technology do I do. So if I'm like, you know, so I could say, oh, I got screening data, I'm going to build a major gift model. What if my goal really is I need to help my fundraisers get more discovery and qualification visits as they go out into the community at this gift range? Okay, that's a goal. Working back from that, what data do we need to help us answer that? And what technique and technology do we need to apply to that data to help us figure that out? So data, technology, technique, I could talk about these things all day, but where I think the industry is moving and how it's maturing is it's understanding the need to be able to connect these to business outcomes. And then when we do, data becomes less of a noun and it becomes more of a verb. It becomes more part of our daily approach to how we fundraise and go about our business. I think I couldn't advance the slide with a drawing tool. I apologize. So, like I said, we're evolving from a noun to a verb. It's becoming less of, oh, here's a score, or here's a rating, and it's becoming more of, oh, this is part of a process to our daily strategic decision making, whether at the tactical level or a strategic level at a larger level. So we're definitely moving towards there, which is very exciting. So that means participating on this conversation today, you're involved, and you're going to be more and more intimately involved in larger conversations. You know, and leadership is really relying upon data to support even more and drive strategic decision making. The days of just, hopefully, I think, and I'll talk about this in a minute, the days of campaign goals, you know, the board saying, oh, we're 150 years old, let's do 150 million and then go with it. I think those days are sunsetting more than they used to be in the industry even 5-10 years ago. So people are really starting to see the value when we align it. Again, this is key. When we align the data that we have, like the great data that iWave can provide, and we do it with it doesn't need to be complicated, with a thoughtful technique or approach. When we can align that to goals, leadership really starts seeing the ROI. And so that connection between kind of the back of house or the data team or the analyst and the leadership is really continuing to grow. So so I see nothing but excitement ahead and opportunities. But the things I'm going to share today, to be honest, I talk about making most of the best data we have. Even though I've done all sorts of, and I to some degree still do, a lot of pretty complex, pretty sophisticated analytics projects, I've become the most reductionist analytics consultant you may ever meet. And so if I can just put together, add 2 cells on the spreadsheet and help you figure out, and that's going to transform how you raise money, I'm happy to do that. So I don't need to prove or show all these crazy sophisticated things, and then I have advanced degrees in mathematics and programming, etc. That's not important to me. It's what's important to me is making the most of the best data we have. And so the techniques I'm going to talk about today, really, minus the predictive modeling piece, definitely the last 2 techniques are really things that you could probably do today. And they can do if you can export the data or query the data out in some summary way. So they're not going to be very sophisticated, but they don't need to be sophisticated. Some of the best recipes and dishes that we all know and love are very simple. 4 ingredients cooked in a very basic way is time-honored and delicious. And so, just because we have more data and we're trying to be more sophisticated with how we're using it doesn't mean we need to be more sophisticated in our approach. So just be forewarned that what I'm going to be sharing may not be, math. It's not going to be a math test. It's not going to be mathematically rigorous. It's just about applying this information. Again, the iWave information is absolutely fantastic. Applying it in a very thoughtful way, in a way that ties and aligns to our goals, which then helps it have more value, and then it helps us increase our budget to be able to do more screening and invest in other kinds of data and resources that drives our analytics forward. So I'm going to turn it back over to Trent, and he's going to talk a little bit around kind of wealth screening and the iWave approach, and we'll talk about some of the actual resources that they use.
Great, thanks, Alex. And apologies, before I jump into this, I forgot a little bit of housekeeping as I kick things off. I'm hopeful there are questions and thoughts as we're going through this, and so if there are, please feel free to use the chat window. It should be on the right-hand side of your screen, and give us some questions as they come up. We're going to try to carve out time at the end, and we'll do a Q&A, but as they come up, please pop them into the chat, and we'll keep track of them for some follow-up. But as Alex mentioned, I wanted to give a little bit of an introduction for those who are familiar with iWave, or maybe you're users, or maybe you're evaluating the solution. This may be somewhat familiar, but again, I wanted to kind of give you a bit of a lead into what Alex is going to talk about and connect the dots. Again, my focus is establishing relationships with partners like BWF to allow us all to bring a more valuable product and service to our clients. So as Alex gets into some of the more detailed and strategic elements of analytics, I wanted to set the stage for how does the iWave solution facilitate that. So as we look at the graphic in the top, it's really a process. The screening, when we talk about screening, we talk about it as a process to facilitate a goal, right? And back to Alex's point. So when we talk about it at iWave, our goal is really to help you find the most highly valued prospects in your database or your universe, whether they be existing donors or prospective donors, and helping you do that through all of the data that's available. That includes the data that you've got, as well as the data that we've got access to and can provide you access to, looking at that holistically, which includes both wealth as well as philanthropic information, and combining that or those data elements in the right way based on your organization's focus. So that becomes a pretty important point actually in terms of the combination or the equation that we use to combine that data. There are really three key elements that we think about at iWave, being capacity, how much does someone have available, how much do they have to give, as well as propensity, do they have a history of giving or parting with that wealth, and affinity, does someone actually have an interest or an affiliation to our particular cause or a particular project within our cause. And again, combining those so that we've got the right balance of capacity, propensity, and affinity working together to help point us in the right direction. So I won't go into all the weeds of that today, but as you look at that graphic, that's really what we're trying to depict. You'll notice the sliders beside each of those words indicating the fact that those keys may be variables. So capacity may be more important to one organization than another. Propensity may be the most important to a second or a third organization. And again, finding the right balance. At the end of the day, once we've helped you determine what that balance is and are able to go through that screening process, what we're able to do is give you that score. So back to one of the points Alex made, this isn't the be-all and end-all, but the score that comes out of the iWave solution allows you to analyze that entire database and or prioritize that database to most effectively engage and communicate with your prospects and or your donors, so that you're able to use your time effectively and get to actually executing on the strategies that Alex is going to share with us as we move forward. The last piece of the sorry, Alex, just one last piece on the previous slide. Okay. The last piece in the illustration there is the fact that it's not a static or a one-time exercise. That screening exercise is something that we believe should happen periodically, and that period may be different for individual organizations and based on the rate at which you accumulate new prospects, new donors, and new data. And that's probably the biggest driver in our minds at iWave is the rate of accumulation today. There's so much data being generated. Not all of it is the most valuable, but there's so much data being generated today that that doing a screen today doesn't necessarily mean the results of that screen are consistent or still as indicative as they could be at some point in the future. Again, that some point, I'm using air quotes here, is potentially going to change organization by organization, but we encourage that screening process to be an ongoing activity. So moving into where does all this come from in the next slide, it's really about the data as I described, combining the data that you have along with the data that iWave can provide access to. And this is a bit of an eye chart. I'm not expecting people are reading this unless you may be in a room with a bigger screen. But it's a snapshot of the types of data that we make available. And the one thing that I'll point out is you'll probably recognize some of the logos here that are data sets that are available. We also have our own data. So we're combining your data, our data, and the outside world's data to bring you that complete picture, or as complete a picture as possible with all the different data elements. The other point I'll make on this is that our data sources are continuing to evolve and expand. So if you're looking at this in a recording, please don't hesitate to check in with us in terms of where our data sets sit today. And again, hopefully this gives us all a perspective of the fact that we're bringing a ton of information that we can turn into intelligence and kind of fuel what Alex is going to take us through for the rest of the presentation. Alex, back to you.
Great, thank you, Trent. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff as you can see on this list. And so actually, some of these sources kind of feed in well to kind of the first application I'm going to talk about, which is kind of being constituent focused. And so I do a lot of predictive modeling, right? So trying to predict or determine some kind of donor outcome. in the future, and I use screening and wealth information often, but I use it a different way than you might guess or might understand. So that's the first one I'm going to talk about. And here's a great reminder I always like to share with myself. George Box is a very famous British statistician, and I always start every presentation, especially if I'm presenting results to leadership, and that I'm not delivering you a silver bullet or some kind of organizational panacea to your fundraising struggles, that in fact all models are wrong. Some just happen to be very useful for us. So from a predictive modeling standpoint, analytics cannot raise major gifts. We all know that, but we can contribute, I think, significantly to help us identify and focus our efforts. And so my best practice approach is to focus on the analytically related, the three factors of major giving. And so those are probability, which is predictive modeling, warmth, which is engagement and connection, and potential, which is kind of capacity and wealth screening, which is what we're talking about here. So from that standpoint, so potentials, this would more directly relate to some of the iWave data. And so from an analytics approach, I'm a little bit more probably Fred Flintstone than some other people. For me, wealth is kind of like a binary state. It's kind of like pregnancy. You are or you're not. You have wealth and you don't. From an analytics standpoint, and where I think analytics fits in the prospecting and identification process. Obviously, when you get down into the major gift cultivation and solicitation cycle, should I ask for 5 million or 7 million? Then, degrees of wealth, I think, are significantly important. But just from a broad standpoint, it's like, does this person have money or not? And then there's probability, and then there's the warmth piece. And so I think when you have all three, that's the environment in which you get a major gift. So, but if you don't have all three, there's some work to be done, right? And then, we can work on warmth. Probability we might be able to change. We can't do anything about potential. We can't make our constituents more rich. We can make them more engaged. And so, for example, I'm an alum of the University of Minnesota, and very highly engaged with them, and I would be a major donor if I could. I don't have the resources to. So I have high probability and high warmth. I don't have the potential to do so today. And so the reason I presented these things like this is because I like focusing around using analytics and treating these as independent items, and then it allows me to combine them. So I don't put, for example, I don't put capacity or wealth. I don't put that in a predictive model, especially a major gift model. I never do that. I want to be able to overlay that at the end. So I want to see who has a high probability Trent and also high capacity Trent versus who has high probability Alex, below capacity Alex at the end. It helps me kind of triangulate my approach more. So what I'm really going to be talking about is the way in which I can integrate, or I would recommend integrating, wealth screening information into models to try to understand and predict probability, right? So that's the likelihood of someone making a gift. Someone might have a high probability but low warmth. Someone might have a high warmth but low probability. So again, like I said, consider potential as a binary state. Exclude other measures of wealth. So how much you are worth, or what's your real estate holdings, etc. I leave that information out, right? But what I do like to include is separate. I guess they shouldn't be wealth indicators, but maybe philanthropic indicators that might be reflective of a distinguishing behavior. So when you do something, for example, when you do a screening with iWave, there's a lot of data points included in there. Some of which include like giving to other charitable organizations. Are you a political donor? Do you give to in the United States? Do you give to political causes? Do you serve on leadership positions on boards, right, that are filed with Form 990s? And so do you have fiduciary responsibility of a nonprofit, regardless of the size? It shows some level of commitment to philanthropic organizations and giving time, talent, or treasure. So these are all things that come within a wealth screening. So I wouldn't put an actual number or a wealth screening rating within a model, but I would put a flag for an indicator of, hey, this person supports political campaigns, or this person has a flag for their have a Form 990 leadership position and they're serving on a board somewhere. Those kind of independent elements I would include. And so there's some kind of disaggregated data within wealth screening. So I would include it as a flag. I wouldn't say, I don't know, I think I probably gave, $50 during the last U.S. presidential campaign to a candidate, and someone else maybe gave $25,000, which I think is the maximum. So I won't put in the amount, but I'll put in just the presence of. And so I'm looking for not the degree of behavior, but do you have this behavior, or can we identify that? And so what's interesting is I think this allows us to uncover other kinds of philanthropic behavior that actually might be more important at flagging top donors. Kind of the interesting reality of wealth screening is that, the more money people are worth, the harder it is to identify what that wealth really is. So you might have someone in there, and from a wealth perspective, they may not look considerably wealthy, but they are on a board and they give politically and they give to other charitable organizations. Well, that information, how much they give, that's if it's of a certain size, we can access that. And so what we might be doing is we might not be giving these people a chance and not be flagging them for further research and discovery and qualification because the depth or the greatness of their wealth or potential may not be as immediately recognizable through a wealth screening as it might be if we flag them based upon some of the elements that will come up through a wealth screening. So as you get your iWave data back, don't just look at kind of that top sheet number and real estate. There's lots of other ways we can use the data within that comprises that wealth number that they provide that are also kind of indications of certain kinds of donor types. And these are not always a truism. This is not like a rule that someone that gives to political campaigns will always be a major gift donor. But I've worked with this data, especially the iWave data, enough to know and see that this information has value beyond just saying Trent has this much potential and Alex has this much capacity. So if you're doing predictive modeling internally, you're building these things, go ahead and do it. If you're interested in building predictive modeling, I'm always happy to talk about that. This is an approach that we take, and we use the iWave data in that way in terms of integrating the screening information to the modeling results we do. So that's how we can look at constituents. One, I think, still really growing area of analytics in the fundraising space is definitely focusing around staff, right? So usually when you think of analytics, people think of looking outwards, right? We're like, oh, well, who's going to give, and what's the probability, and how much do I think their potential is to make a gift, et cetera, et cetera. And so we spend all this time applying resources, obviously, because, like the old Willie Sutton joke, why'd you rob a bank? That's where the money is, right? So we get our resources from our constituencies. But there's a lot of opportunity, I think, to apply analytics within in a very just fundamental ways with data that you're participating in this webinar because you're an iWave client, and so you already have wealth screening data. So you have all the data in-house to do this next approach that I'm already talking about, which I think can be really, really helpful. And for a lot of organizations that I've worked with, dozens of organizations now actually include this as almost like essentially a performance metric as they look at annual health and how they're doing. So what I'm going to be talking about is this idea of yield. Some people might call it share of support, share of wallet, but basically the concept is, we have 100 names in my major gift portfolio. I raised X. They have a potential to give us Z. How much of Z did we yield? What's our share of wallet? How much do we yield from our potential? So it's not just looking at fundraising totals as a number, but looking at it relative to what we believe is identified opportunity, right? So if I have, we raised $10 million and we had $100 million of potential, we yielded 10%, right? And so again, what we look at so to calculate yield or create yield, right, I tend to look at the last 5 years giving, and I tend to take that against capacity. So capacity, the broad general definition of capacity is the #1 gift you would make to your top philanthropic priority during a 5-year campaign, right? So that roughly somewhere between 5 and 10% of net worth is usually where that leans out. So that's why I'll take the last 5 fiscal years giving, and I'll compare that to the capacity, which kind of fits over that same time frame for a gift. And this gives us a yield. So there's some cautionary things. We can't do yield then, obviously, really on corporation and foundations because we don't really have ratings in the same way on them. So yield is definitely a metric that I use when we're talking about fundraising from people or living individuals, constituents. Another cautionary tale is some of you participating on this call have some constituents and supporters who have considerable wealth, and that can make the numbers kind of get sideways a little bit. So for example, I'm working with a client down in Houston, Texas, and Houston is a very wealthy community, a lot of energy, oil, gas money and stuff down there. And this is a significant, one of the top nonprofit organizations in the Houston community. So a lot of the big, wealthy people, millionaires, billionaires, there's a lot of billionaires in Houston, all support this organization. Well, so for example, Michael Dell is a donor, right? Dell Computer. Well, I'm not putting in Michael Dell's actual giving capacity, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't know, 800-900 million, because his wealth is so vast. I bring the ratings down at the top end, and I cap them. If this is relevant for you, I cap them at 25 million. So Michael Dell could easily give more than 25 million. In fact, I think he's probably given more than 25 million to this organization. But just for the purposes of doing calculations, I try to put some restraints and limits on what we're doing, because otherwise our denominator gets really large if you include Michael Dell and Warren Buffett and the Walton family and so forth, who all support this organization. So consider capping ranges when they get really, really high. So here's an example. And what's great about the yield is this gives us a really flexible metric that allows us to assess in just kind of a high-level way performance, but it allows us to assess performance at a variety of different levels. So if Trent and Alex were major gift officers, we could each have our own yield, which is how much do we raise against what's the potential in our portfolios. And then if the two of us together were part of fundraising team A, then we'd have an overall fundraising team A performance yield, right? So it's how much did Trent and I raise versus what is our potential together. And then if we worked for organization B, we might have an organization overall yield, right? So Trent might have done 12%, I did 3%. As a group, we did 6%, but the organization only did 2%. Well, we're performing better than the organization overall. And so it allows us to, as I kind of quickly walk through those numbers, it allows us to compare groups, teams, individuals in a broad sense. I don't really recommend using yield from an HR strategic management perspective. I don't recommend. I've never made a recommendation to use it in a way around kind of performance or bonus calculation perspective. That's not what I'm talking about. But just in a way of saying, these people do good here, or this is where our team's really doing well against the potential. Here's an area of opportunity we're not accessing enough, and here's where we are strategically. It's a great number, and it's one that we can always calculate year over year and kind of track how we're doing. So as you can see from this list here, you can see the capacity, 3 billion. They did 790 million for the last 5 years. That's 25%. You can see each group actually had different performance against the potential that they had available to them. So this concept of yield, very easy to do. The numerator, last 5 years giving, the denominator, giving capacity, the number, not the rating, but that actual number. Again, I would strongly recommend, you don't have to, but I'd strongly recommend capping anything that's north of 25 million at 25 million, and then calculate that number and see what that really is. Some other cautionary things, yield is only as good as the amount of screening data that we have, right? So, if we only have 12% of the database screened, but 50% of our database has made gifts in the last 5 years, our denominator, our bottom number is going to be really, really low compared to what it probably is. It's not because it's actually low, it's because we don't know. We don't have the screening data. So that's a little bit of a cautionary tale around this approach. Usually when I work with clients, I make recommendations around kind of, improving the coverage of their screening data. And this is one of the reasons why is they want to get this yield calculation. They want to be able to see actually how well they're doing against the potential and the performance they've had. So this is a growing kind of concept within the science of fundraising. Again, I'm not passing anything over on you guys. This is a very simple concept, but when it's applied very thoughtfully, it can be really impactful, and it can really help you uncover differences between individual performance, team performance, organizational. You can see the yield of a fundraiser who's been here 18 months versus one who's been here 10 years. You can see different yields at different levels of giving, right? So we might actually yield really well at a principal gift level, which might be $1 million, but we struggle at $25,000 level giving. We don't really execute well there. Okay, well, that's a finding for us. What are we doing? What can we understand to better execute at different levels? So it's a really flexible, malleable metric of performance, again, from a strategic perspective, not from an HR perspective, that I think everyone could turn around and do today if you have this data in your database. And I think it can prove helpful for everyone on this phone, because every organization that I've worked with for the last 10 years has found the idea of yield important for them as well. So we looked at constituents. We looked at people on the outside, which is very common what we do now. We looked at staff. So we thought about one basic way to try to say, and I talked about, you shadowed out now, but it says apples to apples, right? So if Trent raised 10 times as much as me, but he also had 10 times as much potential as portfolio, maybe we actually did about the same level of work because he was working on a different scale. So it kind of allows for a little bit more balance and comparison among people versus the potential they had. And you can really, I think, a lot more fair way measure people's success, depending on the size, the quality, and the wealth in their portfolio. It allows for a little bit more of a level playing field. So the last piece I want to talk about, which is kind of combining this idea I talked about at the beginning, we have warmth, so engagement or connection. We have probability, which is a model, and we have potential, which is like the great data that iWave can provide, is to kind of align all three when we're talking about goal setting and strategic campaign planning and how much money are we going to raise. And I talked a little bit at the beginning of our conversation that oftentimes people just come up with it's our sesquicentennials, we're going to do 150 million. Or if any of you work in a higher education institution, especially a university, that's always the great one. You go around to I feel like academic deans are kind of like kids at Christmas, right? And they're like, when you're talking, for the most part, growing up, when you talk to children and they come up with Christmas lists, they don't say, oh, how much money do we have? They just come up with a list of stuff they want, right? And so deans do that. Oh, here's all the stuff I want. Well, that's great. I don't know if we could do it, but thank you for the list. And sometimes boards will take the dean's list and they'll make a goal out of it. And so there's a lot of campaign planning that's happened, it still happens, that's irrespective of reality, and I think that's changing. So when I worked for Wells Fargo, if I said, if I walked into a meeting at Wells Fargo and I said, hey, here's a new business, and I think this business is going to do $400 million for you next year, they would say, well, do we have the supply of customers to do this business? Show me the market demand. And if I didn't present it to them, they'd laugh me out of the room. We do that all the time in fundraising. We come up with goals, but we don't really prove that beyond, at a very deep level, that we have the potential. I don't think we do it enough. And so one way we can do this is to kind of focus on our strike zone, what I like to call the strike zone. So again, this is using wealth, and just actually a connection score or an engagement score. So how close or how warm are you to an organization, or how distant are you? And this doesn't mean that we don't have wealth screening on everybody, and this doesn't mean that someone who's warm is going to stay warm for forever, or someone who's chilly will always be cold. But again, this at a very high level allows us to get a look at today, what does the landscape look like? Do we have the prospects and names to be able to identify on this? And I'll show you the strike zone in a minute. And so again, This is just an opportunity when we leave wealth out of other analytics, when we leave capacity numbers and we use it as kind of an independent overlay, it offers a lot more dynamic opportunities. So this is from that same client. They have a very large database. They have a lot of people who are very connected to them. So what we're doing, or what I was trying to do with them from an organizational standpoint, is we have campaign goals. Okay, so we roughly came up with a gift pyramid or a campaign pyramid for these goals. So we said, okay, well, where are the prospects today, not based on wealth, but based on wealth and warmth. And so I don't know if everyone on the phone is a baseball fan, but I'm a baseball fan. And one of the commonly known statistics in baseball is that the batting average of a Major League Baseball player in the strike zone is 600. So that's a ball over the plate, below the belt, above the knees. Every Major League Baseball player on average hits 600 for those pitches. The average Major League Baseball batting average is 212. And so if it's over the plate, below the belt, above the knees, Major League Baseball players are really good at swinging at those pitches. The problem is they swing at bad pitches all the time. And that's why their batting average is so low, right? So if they were just swinging at strikes, they'd be fine. But they get fooled, curveball, slider, or whatever, and they swing at stuff they shouldn't be swinging at. And so what we're trying to help this organization do is we're saying, okay, so these are people that have capacity, a lot of wealth here, and they're also what I would call connected or very connected. So these are people that are warm to your organization. They already support you. You give them a call, they're not going to say who. So these are our strikes. This is over the plate, below the belt, above the knee. These are great pitches to swing at. So let's focus on these, at least from a strategic standpoint, let's focus on these and not worry so much about swinging at these names. Here's 40 names, 44 names. Here's 148 names. There's $10 million. These are wealthy people, but those are pitches that are a little outside. You can make contact with them, but again, our batting average is really, really low with those names. We want to be swinging at things, again, below the belt, above the knee, over the plate. So not a very difficult concept. I'm not going to get into the connection and engagement score that I built for them, but these are lots of organizations already have them. They're pretty easy to build. It's not even a predictive model. It's just additive. What do we value? What do we think is engagement that's represented in the database? Okay, let's count that. Let's create a score, see where everyone aligns, and then overlay our wealth data like this. And again, we can get a sense of, do we have the names and potential right now to execute on a campaign? And so in this case, for this client, I would say they do. They have a lot of names in here. Sometimes we'll apply this, and then we'll overlay the results, and the smallest numbers are in the strike zone. And then the largest numbers, for example, at the top range, the largest numbers will be over here. So that doesn't mean you can't execute on a campaign goal, but it does mean to me at the top level of the pyramid, we have a lot of engagement work to do before we get these pitches inside where we can make some contact at them. Again, we can make our constituents more rich. We can't make them more engaged. That's work we can do, but it's helpful for me to share with my client that there's work that needs to be done at this broad level. So this is not getting into exact prospect. This is not getting into how much people are going to give. This is just saying, we have a broad campaign goal. Do we even have warmth and potential today that looks like it could support that? For this client, our recommendation was yes, obviously, and there's a lot more potential out there to swing at, but we're trying to get them, again, to focus on somewhere in the 30,000 names that are above 100K that are warm to them today. We can execute the campaign goal that they're looking for. So not a statistically robust concept at all, just as kind of a thoughtful application of, in fact, they already had their own connection score, thoughtful application of analytics and data that they already had in a way that is, again, tied to goals. Do we have the potential, and is it ready to, do we have pitches that we can swing at today? There's a thoughtful application of the connection score with iWave data. This is an iWave client. It was very, very helpful and transformative to them. So where do we head from here? going back to those first slides, again, I would really start from the goal up. And once you do, the best use of data and the right data that you need will come into focus in the technology and technique. So we all get excited. Again, I started from a place that I still am, but a data scientist. I get excited about technology and data and information, but only if it's helpful, right? And it's hard to get. So back up out of this trap. Let's start with the goal up. And what's nice is when we start with the goal up, especially if you're on the analytics side within your organization, this is a really easy way and actually very helpful way to bring more people into your conversation and get buy-in. So instead of starting with a very, I need screening data, I need this X data overlay, or I need to buy, I need to learn R programming so I can do Z or some other thing, have a conversation with a key leader in your organization and say, what do you wish we had more of? Oh, we have donors like Trent. I wish we had more Trent. Trent's a fantastic donor. He went from $1,000 to $10,000 in the last 5 years, and he's increased X, and then now he's doing it as a recurring donation, which is awesome because that's a higher likelihood of renewal. There's a lot of things about Trent. I wish we had more Trents. Okay, well then our goal is to build models around Trent and people that look like Trent. And so that can help you get a narrative sense, and it can help you tie what we're doing to outcomes, and you might get a lot more ideas. So start with goal up. What do we want to learn, and how, and then also how will it be used, right? This is the number one problem I find with analytics that don't ever get off the ground is people design things. They don't really think about who's going to be using it. They don't think a lot about audience. They think about creating it. So think about your audience. Look within our organizations. Don't be afraid to look at things like yield and treat wealth as in some different ways. Because there's some strategic insights that you can gain from looking at things. Maybe treat, at some level, treat wealth as binary and look for some other stuff within the screening data that iWave provides, because there's a lot of, when you unpack that data, there's a lot of rich, very powerful information that's kind of in there. You just have to kind of dig through and find out where it is and how it aligns. And then again, look for things that support strategic business decisions, like organizational capacity and its warmth. And then the final thing is just embrace new approaches, but where they fit. And then always, number one thing I always talk about is prepare for success. So when we're starting out something, just because someone has an idea or building a model or does a technique at a conference, it may or may not be a fit for your organization. It may not be a fit for the skills and talent you have on staff. It may not be a fit for your timeline. It may not be a fit for financial budget reasons. It may not be a fit because it may not be something that is going to be helpful, right? It doesn't fit our goals model. So where it does fit, though, embrace and try new things, but then always be prepared for success. And so that's the number one thing, is every project should start with a winning dish mentality, right? So prepare for the demand. So just imagine you're a chef in a kitchen, and you're an up and coming chef, and you're working the salad line or something, and the head chef says, hey, everybody, all the junior chefs here, you guys prepare something. I'm going to add one new dish. I'm going to highlight you on the menu. We'll meet tomorrow night. Present your dish, and the winning dish is going to go on the menu. It's a great opportunity. We'll prepare our dishes like it's going to go on the menu, which means I don't want to do something that I can just do once, and it takes a super long time. It's really complicated, or we got lucky because we got some special data thing, or the sample is just right. Prepare every time you're preparing something, even new things. Just be mindful of that this is going to be successful, and I'm going to need to do this again. Because that's the other, besides not knowing your audience, is the other way where I've seen analytics projects fail that use wealth screening is when people build things, they don't prepare to have to think about ever having to do it again. And so they create this thing. So it's like you're the chef in a restaurant, and you make this amazing salad because you're working the salad line. The chef loves it. It's so amazing. The town's going to go nuts. The city's going to go nuts. You're going to be in Food and Wine magazine, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we need to create 200 more of these. Well, to make the salad, you had to carve a rose radish, and it took you 4 hours, right? Or something like that. And it's just totally, when putting a salad together, it should take 10 minutes. And so you built something amazing, but you didn't build it in mind of being able to do it again. And going back to this idea about treating analytics and well screening and the great data that iWave can provide, treating it not just as a noun but as a verb. So it needs to become a process, right? Not a project all the time. So treat or have a winning dish mentality with everything you build, and keeping that in mind, and trying to, as much as you can, steer away from the real kind of specialty, unique stuff. Because if it becomes successful and everyone loves it, you're going to be spending the rest of your working hours building this annoying specialty, unique thing that you didn't really think about how it's going to be used in the long run. So there's some techniques, there's some ideas, there's some approaches. They're not overly sophisticated, but I think they're helpful. So I'm going to pause. I was speaking for quite a long time there, but I'm going to take a pause right there and connect back bring Trent back on the line and see if anyone participating has any questions about some of the things we've been talking about today.
Thank you very much, Alex, and for everyone who joined us today. I think that was fantastic. Hopefully, everyone got at least a nugget in some of the things that Alex shared with us. We do have a few questions that have come in, and I'll remind everyone to use the chat in the GoToMeeting if you do have questions. As we kind of get into the discussion here, feel free to share them. We have about 5 minutes left, so we can take a few. Alex, hopefully you've caught your breath. I've got one here that's come in that hopefully can give us some guidance on. So the question is, how can your clients ensure that the prospect names they get from a screening with iWave do not violate the do not call or do not mail lists?
That's a good question. Well, you know, Trent, you might actually have, so do not call, do not mail, or do not solicit can be a very specific thing. I don't think there's no, in the United States, there's no national philanthropic do not call or do not mail list that I'm aware of. There is one for telemarketing, and you could become a part of it and register, but there isn't one from a philanthropic perspective. And so from that angle, I don't think anyone's going to be in violation. That's a very organizational specific, and organizations are kind of the responsible keeper parties. So I'm on a do not call, do not email for, if you give to one animal charity, sometimes animal charities are very friendly and generous with their lists. So I'm on a do not call, do not email for some animal charity in upstate New York just because they were sending me a lot of stuff and I didn't want to support them. But I give money to the University of Minnesota, and I give money to St. Jude, and I give money to other places. And so there's no universal do not call, do not email, do not solicit list for me. So I would kind of turn that around and say that's really incumbent upon the client, and it's their responsibility to maintain those lists. Even if they have do not call, do not email, they still might be worth screening. The other tricky thing, just to be aware of, is if you look in any organization with a mature major gift shop, if you look at all their best prospects, every single one of them has a do not call, do not email, do not solicit tag on them, because they want to suppress them from all the one-to-many efforts, because we know Trent and Alex are going out and meeting with those people individually too. So just be aware as you're going through some of the do not call, do not email, some of the best organizations for every name, some of the best names for every organization have that characteristic flagged within a database.
Thanks, Alex. And yeah, I would echo that. I think it's really an organization by organization exercise, and unfortunately, probably is a bit of an exercise to make sure that the screened results are mapping back to the database and the flags that you may use to manage those do not call or do not mail, kind of the spam compliance policies internally. I think it's also a great point that many of the top prospects or existing donors probably fit into that or fall into those lists today and have a different means of correspondence anyway. We have another question that's come in. Can you suggest a way that screening can help in the effort to re-engage lapsed donors with the goal of increasing retention rates? Is that something that's kind of something you come across before, Alex?
Yeah, so that goes back to screening, and then I would look at for lapsed donors. There is a certain kind of threshold where, for me, lapsed donor or long lapsed donor becomes a non-donor again. So if you haven't given to somewhere in 10 years, to me, you're essentially starting as a non-donor. But for long-lapse donors, you know, I would look at, this is again, I talked about from the predictive modeling standpoint, but you could even just do it from a descriptive standpoint. If you have that great data within an iWave file that says, you know, they're not only giving, or this is their wealth, but here's where else they're giving. Going back to this idea around share of wallet and how are we yielding against that, it'd be interesting to see. So some places, it also depends on your market too, but some places we found long-lapse donors that were also still philanthropically active. We targeted them, and I've had some clients, to be honest, is probably not going to be the helpful answer. I've had some clients where we've targeted long-lapse donors where we had flags of other philanthropic contributions, and we were able to re-engage those donors to increase our renewal rates. And why I said this was market dependent, I had a client in New York, we did the same thing, and we focused on the donors that had a lot of philanthropic contributions elsewhere, and we didn't actually increase. And so what we did is we probably should have focused on the people that are long lapsed but are not potentially giving anywhere else, because the market was so crowded that we were trying to, in one institution in New York, we're trying to reach out to people that were already giving elsewhere. Well, they were too busy, we had a low share of wallet. Other organizations, we can already reach out to those that are long lapsed and are still giving, right? So they still have that kind of that muscle memory of making donations, reaching out to those people versus those who have gone completely cold from a philanthropic support perspective. So I've actually seen it break both ways, but the key part to it is using that iWave data that is the indicators of philanthropic contribution, serving as a leadership on a board, political contribution, et cetera. That data can break either way for an organization, but using that data in a smart way, I think can help you get at that question.
Great, yeah, and it goes back again to one of the points I brought up was around propensity, and how propensity, I think, is really what we're talking about. You know, being able to measure whether they've been a long lapsed and active elsewhere or recently lapsed. You know, the fact that propensity measurement may vary in a campaign by campaign, but using it smartly, as you said. So we are right at the top of the hour time frame that we asked everybody to join us for. I'm guessing there are probably other questions out there that people are kind of percolating through. We do have a couple others that have come in, but we've run out of the hour that we asked for. So we're going to say thanks again for joining us today and wrap things up. But please feel free to reach out. I think there's another slide there, Alex, with contact info for both of us and our organizations. So if you have any questions that are still out there or that come up as you kind of digest what we've gone through today, please feel free to reach out. We definitely want to get in touch and help you in any way we can. Thanks for everyone's time. And Alex, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Trent. Appreciate the opportunity.
Have a great day, everyone.